I love Resident Evil, and I love video essays on content that I enjoy in relation to the constantly shifting values that the entertainment industry puts forth. So having a chance to do a video essay on Resident Evil is like that the stars have all aligned and stuff, and pigs are now flying, because if there's one thing I love about Resident Evil, it's being able to talk about it. Well, that and play the games, but suffice to say, the idea of a live-action Resident Evil series being created by Netflix did pique my interest. And when I finally got a chance, I sat down and watched an episode. And an episode turned into several episodes. And the only thing that kept me from binging the whole first season was the minor inconvenience of having an actual and meaningful job. But finish the series, I did. This won't be the first time I've made a video that went against the popular opinions of countless others, nor will it be the last, but I still feel obligated to stand up for this series and speak on behalf of all those who also enjoyed this show and just don't have that much of a platform to stand on. And I get it. Live-action video game adaptations haven't really done that well in the cinematic landscape of media, but it always wasn't for a lack of trying. And while the likes of Assassin's Creed, Rampage, and Mortal Kombat have their passion for their source material on full display, passion alone isn't always enough. One of the first things that caused a lot of criticism was that of Lance Reddick's casting as Albert Wesker. You know, Resident Evil's longtime resident of evil. And while he does appear in the show, we actually wind up following one Al Wesker and his two daughters, Jade and Billy. Jade has been dubbed the title of being the most irredeemable pissant of all time, and while on the surface, yes, 1,000 times yes, she manages to make Diary of a Wimpy Kid still look like the good son in comparison. Okay, in her defense, it's not like this 14-year-old rebellious, undisciplined, ungrateful child had that much parental guidance to teach her right from wrong, because dear old Papa Wesker spends more time with Umbrella than he actually does being there for his family. This inattentive nature would allow Jade and Billy to develop this Thelma and Louise style fuck the system mentality, and it seems that the former really wants that version of her sister back, but is now all like, nah, it is cool. I really don't want to go down that rabbit hole again. Then she spouts out something vegan nonsense, even if it means getting bullied at school. But don't worry, Papa Wesker steps in to sort through things in an equally cathartic yet terrifying confrontation between the bully's father and the principal.
If I call the people that own this town, the people that pay you and me and her, what happens if I call them and I say that I'm going to quit unless they fire you? No, I'm sorry, I don't want you fired. I want you blacklisted. I want it so that no tech company ever hires you. Not Apple, not Google. I want Pornhub to shred your resume. Now, if I say that, what do you think they're going to do, Dave?
This scene alone sold me on Lance's portrayal of Wesker. Always in a position of power, we've seen Albert display said power in the games in mostly physical ways like super strength, speed, healing, and durability, but this is the first time we actually see him use his authority and position within the company to get what he wants. By the way, this was all Jade's fault. She beat up the bully, yet put the blame on her sister because she didn't want her walked all over by others. And it's this same type of recklessness that winds up getting this scientist lady in the future killed. Oh, that's right. This series is divided into two timelines, one that's set in 2022 and the other's in 2036. The core plot of the 2022 timeline boils down to the Weskers moving into New Raccoon City, which is different from the old Raccoon City, as this one is set in South Africa, so that Al can be closer to work. The girls find out that New Umbrella is pretty much the same as Old Umbrella when, despite all public claims to the contrary, Billy discovers that the company does conduct animal testing. So later that night, the two break into the Umbrella compound to expose the company. And if people are going to pick apart how impractical them being able to get inside truly was, Remember, this is the same company that literally left the front doors of a mansion filled with zombies wandering its halls unlocked. This is at least a step up from their original security measures, if you were to ask me. And if Billy never stopped to think whether her vegan lifestyle would ever try and come and bite her almost literally in the ass, then her freeing a classic BOW dubbed Cerberus might just change that. Though Jade is able to kill the Doberman, and Papa Wesker was able to cover up the incident, Billy is now infected with the T-virus. What follows is the part of the series that dragged on the most for me, yet gets resolved fast enough to give me whiplash. I understand it was meant to build up the suspense and tension brewing behind Billy's possibly succumbing to the T-virus, and this does give us insight as to what's going on inside her mind in a manner that references the Resident Evil 3 remake. All the while, Jade does a bit of digging around the internet with this guy named Simon, and together they find some pretty nasty dirt on Umbrella. Something about an incident in Tijuana that involves her father. Or is he? Time and time again, people have criticized the teenage drama aspect of this series and likened it to your typical CW show, which is fair. The family dynamic isn't really a prime focus of the games. Well, for the most part. Well, they're there, but they've never really been a central focus of the series so much as a driving force or motivation. But to give the show credit, the games never really have enough time for characters to have a normal, everyday conversation about topics that don't revolve around them getting their bums nibbled off by a honey badger crab monster thing. Could they have fleshed out a bit more character in these teens? Yes. Series showrunner Andrew Dabb hasn't worked on much in his time in the entertainment industry, save for a few seasons of Supernatural, which is a CW show, and it does show in this series. Despite many fans claiming otherwise, Dabb has stated that he wanted to use the games themselves as a foundation to build this series. But where the games go off in one direction, this series will go off in another. This would allow the show to explore almost any facet of a yet unwritten mythology, and where do they go? Surely with this much freedom in a series, we would be reunited with the likes of Chris, Jill, Leon, or even Rebecca as they fight bad guys around the world, but no. We follow these two girls as they're introduced to Umbrella into Raccoon City. You know, the names that are synonymous with Resident Evil lore, and while we know the impact these two entities have in this world, we've never really seen them from this fresh perspective of someone that's unaware of the gravitas and cover-ups they embody. Another way I view this is that our only encounters with either Umbrella or Raccoon City is after the shit hit the fan or no going back from here point, and everything is either in ruins or on fire. While not the most fleshed out of depictions we could have gotten, it does give us an idea of what life may have been like. Now, bear with me for a moment. When you think of the history of something like the Titanic, most people think of the disaster and the tragedy first and foremost, but kind of forget that there was more to that story than the fact that it actually sunk. And in this story, New Raccoon City, like the Titanic, seems like an ideally perfect and welcoming community to live in at first, at least until the iceberg is eventually struck and the whole Dead Rising thing happens. And if the lessons from Sunshine have taught me anything of mankind's hubristic tendencies, things will end on roughly the same note as they did with the original city. And, psst, they do. These flashback scenes tend to almost resonate more in line with the slower and more suspense-driven moments in line with the original Resident Evil games of the past. It wasn't about mowing down countless numbers of monsters as it was trying to figure out what was going on while surviving booby-trapped rooms, actual puzzle-solving moments that require a degree of problem-solving skills, or just being able to play Moonlight Sonata. The girls managed to make their way into Papa Wesker's lab and make a few discoveries. Turns out, their life was a lie. When Al was created by the original Wesker, he was done so as fast as possible. This genetic engineering had caused Al to age rapidly within the span of a few months, but with the side effect of cellular degeneration. In order to stave off his agonizing death, Al created the twins with the exact genetic blood type he needed in order to live. This revelation naturally doesn't go well with the girls, but that's the price of secrets. And if these flashback moments reflect the slower atmosphere and tension-building world of the first games, then the future would be that of the faster-paced, adrenaline-soaked action extravaganza of the new games, a setting no longer bound to one enclosed location, and monsters now typically roam free and wild. Bad guys are no longer content with dealing with our heroes anymore and now must resort to using scores of henchmen to act as their own private army. Entire societies and communities are now forced to adapt to having these creatures as an everyday part of life. The future is messy. Resident Evil has gone through many different phases in its lifetime, and as a result, any subsequent adaptations would have to keep pace with these tonal and stylistic changes. Games have also established time and time again that this plague, and others like it, have sprouted up in places all across the world. Places like China, Spain, Russia, Croatia, Africa, Canada, and America have all experienced at least one biohazard outbreak. Nowhere is truly safe. Unless you so happen to live on a giant boat in a manner more akin to Gears of War 3. But this is Jade's future. This is her world. Spending weeks on end out in this wasteland trying to find a way to combat the undead masses, which, by this point, have either evolved or devolved to a point that renders most of their senses moot except for their sense of smell, as a single drop of blood will draw a horde from miles away. Initially, I thought this was the writers taking some creative freedoms with the source material because zombies in these games don't work like this, but upon closer inspection and realization, this is a callback to Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, as a single drop of blood will send an entire swarm of zombies into a feeding frenzy. It's also in this future that we see some of the various types of BOWs that now roam the world. Aside from the zombies, or Zeros, we get the first live-action depiction of both the Gravedigger and Web Spinners, two creatures from the Resident Evil Rogues Gallery that I never thought I'd see outside the games. But we also get the classic Cerberus and Lickers, which are practically required by law at this point, with a tyrant teased at the very end. And who would have guessed we would have actually gotten a reference to Dr. Salvador in this show? This immediately brought me back to my times playing Resident Evil 4. This is merely the tip of the iceberg, as there are plenty of subtle nods, references, and allusions to the original games for those who played them. Thankfully, they never feel forced or shoved in your face to the point that you're taken away from the actual experience. An experience that I found to have the same levels of fun, campy, yet brutally mesmerizing absurdity found in the likes of Resident Evils 4 through 6. I mean, this is Resident Evil, the game series that is set in a world that has Napoleon cult leaders, boulder punching, Jill sandwiches. Resident Evil has always had at least one foot inside the pool of hammy B-movie ridiculousness, the same kind of splatter and gore violence that made Friday the 13th so endearing, despite the films not always being quite so good. It's not a matter of the brutal gore and violence that can be thrown at you, but more of the creative ways they can be implemented. Case in point, Umbrella. If there was any company I could compare Umbrella to, it'd have to be Vault-Tec from Fallout. Both are comprised of corporate wackadoos that engage with some of the most unethical experiments on humanity since World War II, whilst maintaining the squeaky clean public image whose influence has corrupted entire governments. While Umbrella has committed enough atrocities to make the Nuremberg trials look more like an episode of Judge Judy, that's kind of why I adore them. These absurd levels of dastardly channeled evil that we've come to expect from the Umbrella Corporation, and I guess the same can be said of most Resident Evil bad guys. Which brings me to Evelyn Marcus, a sociopathic businesswoman and CEO of Umbrella with a penchant for maintaining power at all costs, and is the only LGBTQ+ representation this woke show has to offer. Initially, her appearance and overall demeanor carried the same egotistical elegance as Excella from Resident Evil 5, but it's Evelyn's last name that ties her to the franchise's earlier mythology, that being James Marcus, the main bad guy of Resident Evil 0, one of Umbrella's original founders and creator of the T-Virus. Head of Umbrella's training school, at least before being betrayed and gunned down by the company's security forces. This glimpse into Evelyn's backstory makes her motivations clear from the get-go. She will do whatever it takes to ensure that she maintains that position of power within Umbrella, even if it means drugging her own wife so she won't leave her, or shooting her own son so Papa Wesker couldn't use him as leverage in saving his family. Yeah, turns out that while Billy might have been immune to the virus or something, she was still a carrier. With no other options left, Al makes the choice to stay behind, choosing to sacrifice himself for the family he literally created. He knows that he's already a dead man because of the degenerating side effects of the original cloning process. Initially, I was thrown off by the idea of Albert Wesker, the family man, and at first I tried to rationalize how Resident Evil's longtime bioterrorist edgelord managed to wind up living in this suburban house with 2 daughters. And while he is an identical copy to the original, his motivations couldn't be different. The only thing he wanted was a normal life for his family, despite the abnormal circumstances for their existence. The person whose daughters have every reason not to trust him, let alone like him. All the secrets he's kept, the fact that he's needed their blood to stay alive, the lies, the deception, never actually being there for them and always putting his work first. And, like her father, Jade devoted so much time to her work so that her family could live in relative safety and blissful ignorance of how truly terrifying the world really was. And it was only once the daughter looked behind the veil and saw that monsters existed had the genie finally been let out of the bottle. She makes a huge breakthrough in finding a very specific type of zombie that has the ability to both summon or repel entire hordes with a special pheromone that it alone emits. And while there's nothing like this that actually appears in the Resident Evil games, it's still a staple of the current zombie genre games. Sure, she could wait and test her discoveries in a proper and secure environment, but instead, she brings a zombie on board the ship to test the pheromone herself. She knows the danger that this lone action may result in. Not only does it endanger every person yet unknown, but also her family, her own daughter. But her hubris got the better of her, and, like Icarus who flew too close to the sun, things didn't end well. Was this avoidable? Yes. Was this her fault? Yes. Does this make her evil if her intentions are good? Actually, I don't know. But it does make her human. She got what she wanted, but only with a heavy price, because not only is her friend dead, but her dedication to her work forced her to neglect her family in the process. She is her father's daughter. Now the parent must do what they can to protect their family. That's what this series is about to me. It's about the lengths we go to in order to preserve that very human necessity. The darkest secrets we must bear, the atrocities we may have to commit, the foundations and institutions that we may dismantle that stand in our way, the actions we must take to ensure that those closest to us will have a better future, and the consequences we will face as a result. We may not all have to face these obstacles in our lives, and I pray no one has to, but Al did. He was brought into this reality by one of the most evil men in this world, but what separates Al and his brother, Bert, apart from the original, is worthy of life. To make sure that the world that the girls are brought up in is one better than they ever had. Al isn't Wesker. He's a better version of him from a moral and humane standpoint. And Bert's just wonderful.
There was a third one of us, Albie, but he was killed by the original Albert Wesker, our creator. He died in a volcano. It's okay, though. He wasn't very nice. Didn't like me much.
But I digress. This doesn't make any of what he did in the past all right by any means, nor will he ever be able to fully redeem himself in the process. But what he did was his best. In a life defined by pain, tragedies, and in a world that has shown the ease of not caring or even trying, he chose to do better by saving his children, a lesson now passed from father to daughter. What I'm about to say may either blow your collective minds or award me the Understatement of the Year award or achievement, and regardless, I feel like I've won something as a result, but here we go. Jade is not a hero. She shares a direct lineage with a man who all but instigated Armageddon on a bioterror level, and she even helped cause the outbreak that would ultimately damn New Raccoon City. Surely there should be no redeeming this person for all that she's done in her life. Hell, even Billy, who now runs Umbrella in the future and is definitely emitting some Pol Pot vibes, had to spell this out for Jake to understand. Everything you've done has led to disaster. There is no way you could possibly atone for your actions, and yes, dear viewers, she may not be able to undo all the wrong she's done, but that doesn't mean she shouldn't try. Everything she did was for her family and to ensure that they had the best life they can. I think there are plenty of great ideas, themes, subject material within Netflix's Resident Evil that can align perfectly with the growing lore and world that's based off of. I'd even go a step further in saying that people who just see some woke bastardization of a great franchise is not only doing the series a disservice, but themselves as well. Maybe that's just the type of viewer I am, always trying to find a bigger narrative that may be buried within the story. My problems with the series mostly reside within its presentation and execution. Trying to tell a slower paced story can work in some instances, and not every moment needs to be dripping with the over-the-top horror and action that the games embody. But I think that this first season was trying to balance too much content and plot threads that some elements were going to be left a little underdeveloped, to say the least. I personally don't have any problems with race-swapping Albert Wesker for the most part. My only grievance really lies in the fact that they really didn't do anything with the idea, and it never seems to go anywhere. But the casting of Lance Reddick is one of the saving graces of this show that many people tend to agree on. And you know what? Sometimes stories will be retold and reinterpreted in a manner more in line with one's vision. That's just the nature of art. If superheroes are modern-day Greek gods and goddesses, the Resident Evil and other like-minded content are modern B-movies. Initially, I was going to go with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, but the general idea being centered around mankind's endeavors with powers and realities that are simply beyond its comprehension, as well as the misguided consequences of attempting to harness such power, whether it be to cheat death, create life, weaponize fire, brainwash entire communities, or any number of batshit insane experiments. And while some of these stories and ideas are able to withstand the test of time largely unscathed, others will have to undergo some tweaks and updates so as to maintain relevancy to the world at large. Are there dumb moments in the show? Yes, but the same can be said about the games as well. I have no doubt that Andrew Dabb and those behind the scenes of this series had a passion and a love for Resident Evil. Fans might question their understanding and motives into making this adaptation, and you know what? That's fine. It's perfectly fine. My love for Resident Evil and its stories won't be the same as everyone else's, a lesson that's literally right there and explained to you in the show. And it's fine for you to disagree or agree with whatever I have to say. If you love the series, great. Hate it, I understand. But in a world where it's so damn easy just to churn out a product for the sake of a quick buck without any passion or ounce of effort, it is frightening to think of where this series could have gone.